You know what's interesting? We keep hearing about women's struggles with modern dating, but almost no one talks about men's quiet withdrawal from it, not because they've given up on love, but because love no longer feels safe for them. So many men today aren't single by choice, and they're single by experience. They've tried, they've invested, they've given everything they had, and ended up feeling like it was never enough. For years, society has pushed a narrative that men avoid relationships because they're immature, afraid of responsibility, or simply commitment phobic. But if we look closer, that's not the truth anymore. What we're actually seeing today are men who are emotionally exhausted, not from love itself, but from constantly trying to meet expectations that keep changing. Men haven't stopped believing in love. They've stopped believing that love will accept them as they are. Many men grew up being told that their worth lies in what they do, not who they are. That conditioning follows them into adulthood, into relationships, and it shapes the way they connect. They enter dating spaces thinking they have to perform to be worthy. They must provide, protect, stay strong, never show weakness. But modern dating has become an arena where that same strength is no longer enough. They're expected to be emotionally open yet stoic, assertive yet gentle, ambitious but always available. The balance is impossible to maintain and the emotional toll is deep. So when people say men just don't want to commit, what they often miss is that many men did commit. They gave everything they had in previous relationships. They tried to be the provider, the listener, the problem solver, but what they received in return was criticism for not doing it right, not doing it enough, or not doing it fast enough. Imagine spending years trying to love someone the best way you know how, only to be told you're not enough. Eventually you stop trying, not because you don't care, but because you're tired of failing at a test you never understood in the first place. This exhaustion isn't just emotional, it's psychological. Men today carry the pressure of proving they are different from the stereotype, that they're not like the rest, but constantly having to prove your goodness, your loyalty, your value becomes suffocating. It's a cycle of trying, disappointing, apologizing, and retreating. And after a while, that retreat becomes a permanent state. That's when men start saying, I'm better off alone. Not because they want to be alone, but because alone feels safer than misunderstood. There's another layer to this that's rarely discussed: emotional invalidation. When a woman shares her pain, the world listens. When a man does the same, the response is often silence or mockery. So men learn early that vulnerability comes at a cost. In relationships, this manifests as emotional distance. They hold back, not out of disinterest, but out of fear. They know that once they open up, their emotions might be used against them later, thrown back in arguments or labeled as weakness. Over time, men stop sharing altogether. What happens then is a slow erosion of trust in emotional intimacy. A man might date, he might even fall in love again, but there's a wall he won't let anyone cross. That wall is made of every disappointment, every unappreciated effort, every time he was told to do better while he was already giving his best. Women see that wall and call it detachment, but for men, it's self-protection. When men withdraw emotionally, it's rarely out of pride, it's out of fatigue. They're tired of trying to decode mixed messages, to be strong but soft, confident but humble, masculine but sensitive. They're tired of relationships that feel more like performance reviews than partnerships, and so they choose peace. Solitude becomes a quiet rebellion against the pressure to constantly perform love rather than experience it. These men aren't commitment phobic, they're commitment wounded. They once gave everything, and the return was pain disguised as lessons. They are not running from love, they are recovering from it. They've realized that sometimes it's easier to protect your peace than to gamble it for validation that never lasts. This is what the world doesn't see when it labels men as emotionally unavailable. Behind that label are years of unseen effort, misunderstood intentions, and silent heartbreak. Many men don't fear love. They fear what love demands of them in a world that rarely gives them the same grace back. In today's dating culture, one of the most silent yet powerful forces driving men away from relationships is the rise of unrealistic expectations. Somewhere along the way, genuine connection was replaced by comparison, and compatibility became a checklist. What used to be about emotional chemistry has now turned into a transaction of, what can you offer me? Men are not blind to this change. They feel it deeply. Many of them step into the dating world only to realize that no matter what they bring to the table, someone else always seems to offer more. The problem isn't that women have standards. Standards are healthy and necessary. The issue arises when those standards become so inflated that they leave no room for human imperfection. A man is expected to be emotionally intelligent like a therapist, financially stable like a CEO, look like a fitness model, and still have the sensitivity of a poet. He should be available 24/7 yet ambitious enough to build an empire. He should lead confidently but never be controlling. He should express his emotions but never cry too much. The contradiction itself becomes exhausting. Men are being asked to embody every quality that once belonged to multiple archetypes: the protector, the provider, the lover, the nurturer, all rolled into one perfect being who must also never fail. What's even more disheartening is that these expectations are often fueled by social media. The curated version of relationships that people see online becomes the new benchmark for reality. Women scroll through videos of men buying luxury gifts, taking spontaneous trips, writing long emotional paragraphs, and subconsciously begin to expect the same. But what they don't see is the context, the effort behind the scenes, the sacrifices, or sometimes the fiction of it all. Men, on the other hand, absorb the silent message: whatever you do, it will never be enough. This silent competition has eroded authenticity in dating. Many men now feel like they are being interviewed, not loved. Every conversation feels like a test to see whether they fit into an idealized mold. They must say the right things, earn the right amount, have the right opinions, just to be considered worthy of a second chance. And if they fall short in one area, the entire perception of them collapses. It's not that men don't want to grow or improve, it's that they no longer feel accepted during the process of becoming. They're expected to show up already complete, emotionally healed, financially stable, and endlessly patient without ever being granted the grace to just be human. What makes it worse is how subtle these expectations can be. They're rarely spoken directly, yet they're felt in every interaction. When a man senses that love is conditional, that affection depends on his income, appearance, or social status, he begins to detach emotionally. Because deep down, he knows that the love he's receiving isn't for who he is, but for what he provides. That realization changes everything. It breeds resentment, mistrust, and a quiet decision to stay single rather than compete in an endless race for validation. Many women don't realize how deeply men internalize this pressure. Men may not always talk about it, but they see the memes, the online jokes, the constant ridicule of broke men, short men, or emotionally unavailable men. Even light-hearted comments carry weight when they're repeated enough times. Over time, they create a culture where men feel like they have to be flawless just to be noticed. That's not love, that's performance. The tragedy is that this cycle hurts both sides. Women are left wondering where all the good men went, while men quietly withdraw, feeling unseen and undervalued. The truth is, many good men are still here. They've just stopped trying to meet impossible standards. They've stopped auditioning for love that demands perfection, but doesn't offer understanding. They're not hiding, they're healing from the exhaustion of always being compared, measured, and found lacking. Unrealistic standards have turned relationships into competitions instead of connections. And while men are often portrayed as the ones who don't try hard enough, the truth is that many of them have tried too hard for too long. They're not refusing to love, they're refusing to play a game where they can never win. From the moment a man steps into the world, he's taught that his value is measured by what he can provide, protect, and prove. This conditioning doesn't disappear in adulthood. It intensifies, especially in romantic relationships. Men are expected to earn love, not receive it. They are taught that affection, attention, and respect must be achieved through performance, through financial success, emotional restraint, and constant reliability. But what happens when love becomes something you have to perform for instead of something you're allowed to experience? Eventually, even the strongest men grow tired. When men enter relationships, many of them carry the unspoken belief that their role is to fix, build, and sustain. They show love through action, paying bills, solving problems, offering protection, and in return, they hope for appreciation, softness, and emotional peace. But in modern dating, that exchange often feels one-sided. Too often, men find themselves giving endlessly, only to feel unseen or unacknowledged. They put effort into planning, providing, and being emotionally present, but what they hear in return is that they're still not doing enough. Over time, this turns relationships into performances rather than partnerships. In today's culture, men are constantly walking a tightrope between expectation and rejection. They're told to be vulnerable, yet when they open up, they're labeled too emotional. They're told to be assertive, but when they lead, they're accused of being controlling. They're expected to be romantic, but not needy, successful, but not too busy, caring, but never weak. Every move feels like a test, and every misstep risks being disqualified from affection. It's no longer about connection, it's about compliance. This emotional labor leaves men feeling depleted. Love shouldn't feel like a job interview, but for many men, that's exactly what dating has become. They constantly feel the pressure to prove they're good enough to be chosen. They invest money, time, and energy into relationships that often treat them like temporary auditions rather than long-term commitments. And when their efforts aren't reciprocated, they begin to question their worth. The same man who once gave everything slowly learns that no amount of effort guarantees love. The emotional cost of this performance is enormous. Men who once entered relationships with open hearts begin to approach them with caution. They learn to hold back, to give less, to protect their energy, not because they've stopped caring, but because they've learned that giving too much leaves them empty. Every time they pour themselves into someone who doesn't value them, they lose a piece of trust, not just in others, but in themselves. There's also an invisible loneliness that comes with constantly performing. Men rarely admit how isolating it feels to be loved for what they do rather than who they are. The man who works hard, supports his partner, and stays loyal often finds that his efforts are treated as the bare minimum instead of the expression of love that they truly are. When appreciation fades, resentment grows. He starts to feel that no matter how much he gives, it will never be enough to fill the void of expectations. This fatigue doesn't come from weakness. It comes from carrying emotional weight that no one acknowledges. Men are tired of proving their worth just to be tolerated. They're tired of bending themselves into impossible shapes to avoid being misunderstood. They're tired of relationships where love feels conditional, where affection is given only when they're performing at their best. And once they recognize that pattern, many choose distance over disappointment. When a man finally stops performing, it's not a sign that he's cold or detached. It's a sign that he's exhausted. He's spent too long trying to prove that he deserves what should have been freely given. He's tired of being evaluated for his efforts instead of embraced for his essence. For years, he's been applauded for being strong, but no one ever asked how much that strength costs. So he withdraws, not out of arrogance, but out of self-preservation. Men are tired of being tested for love when all they've ever wanted was to be trusted in it. They're not asking for perfection or worship, only for peace. But in a world where they're constantly performing to keep love alive, peace feels like the one thing they can't afford to lose. One of the quietest crises in modern relationships is the lack of emotional safety for men. Society has created a world where men are expected to be emotionally available to women, but are rarely given the same space in return. From a young age, boys are told to man up, to hide their fears, to toughen up, and to never cry. They grow up learning that vulnerability makes them weak, that emotions make them less masculine, and that no one really wants to hear what's going on inside their minds. When these boys become men, they carry that silence into their relationships, but inside they are longing for someone who can make them feel safe enough to be fully seen. In the beginning of a relationship, a man might try to open up. He might share something about his past, his struggles, or his insecurities, but too often his honesty is met with discomfort, dismissal, or even judgment. Sometimes it's subtle, a change in tone, a sarcastic comment, or an awkward silence. Other times it's direct. He's told to get over it, or his feelings are used against him later during an argument. That's when a man learns a painful lesson. Vulnerability is a liability. So he shuts down. He starts keeping things to himself, not because he wants to hide, but because experience has taught him that emotional honesty comes with punishment, not peace. The truth is, most men don't stop expressing emotion because they don't have any. They stop because they don't feel safe to share them. Emotional safety means being able to express fear, sadness, or insecurity without being mocked or diminished. It means being able to say, "I'm not okay," without someone labeling it as weakness. But for men, that safety is almost non-existent. Even in relationships that are loving on the surface, there's often an unspoken expectation that the man will remain strong, consistent, and composed at all times. The moment he breaks that image, the dynamics shift. The protector becomes the one needing protection, and that's something many women aren't emotionally prepared to handle. When men realize this, they begin to create emotional distance. They become quiet, detached, and cautious with what they reveal. They build walls not to keep love out, but to protect themselves from being misunderstood again. To many women, that silence looks like disinterest or emotional unavailability, but for men, it's self-defense. They've learned that every word they share can be weaponized later, that being honest about their fears or doubts can make them appear less of a man. So instead of taking that risk, they choose silence. This silence often becomes misinterpreted as coldness. Women may accuse men of being emotionally numb, when in reality, most men feel deeply. They just no longer trust that their emotions will be safe once spoken aloud. They've seen how quickly empathy can turn into criticism, how fast understanding can turn into mockery, and how easy it is for their emotional needs to be dismissed as unimportant. Over time, this constant invalidation erodes their ability to connect. A man can only be rejected for his feelings so many times before he learns that the safest way to protect his heart is to stop showing it. The emotional cost of that silence is enormous. Men carry the weight of unspoken pain that no one ever sees. They keep functioning, working, providing, and showing up, but inside they're carrying unhealed wounds that only deepen with time. When a man feels emotionally unsafe, he stops seeing relationships as a source of comfort and starts seeing them as potential danger zones. Instead of opening up, he stays guarded. Instead of sharing, he withdraws. And eventually he starts to believe that being alone is easier than being misunderstood again. This emotional unsafety doesn't just happen in romantic relationships, it happens everywhere. It happens in families where fathers never showed affection. It happens in friendships where vulnerability is met with laughter. It happens in workplaces where any sign of emotion is seen as weakness. By the time a man reaches adulthood, he's been trained to suppress, to endure, and to remain silent. So when he finally seeks love, he doesn't know how to express his needs without fear. He's afraid that if he lets someone see the softer side of him, they'll lose respect for him. That's why so many men choose emotional solitude over vulnerability. It's not that they don't want to open up, they're just tired of being punished when they do. They crave the kind of love where they can take off their armor without being told to put it back on. They want to be understood without being fixed, heard without being criticized, and comforted without being questioned. But emotional safety for men is rare, and until it becomes common, many will continue to hide behind their silence, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and no longer trust anyone to handle it. One of the quiet but powerful shifts in modern relationships is the loss of balance between masculine and feminine energy. This isn't about gender roles or who earns more money. It's about emotional polarity, the natural push and pull that makes relationships thrive. For generations, relationships survived on this balance. The masculine provided stability and direction, while the feminine offered warmth, empathy, and emotional connection. But in the rush to modern independence, that harmony has started to fade. Many women today have become so focused on protecting themselves, achieving, and leading that they've unconsciously disconnected from the softer, nurturing energy that once made emotional intimacy possible. Feminine energy is not weakness, it's not submission, nor is it dependence. It's the ability to connect deeply, to empathize, to bring peace instead of chaos, to create safety instead of control. It's what makes a woman magnetic, not because of what she does, but because of how she makes others feel. But in today's world, many women have been forced into survival mode. They've been hurt, disappointed, and left to build alone. In doing so, they've developed habits of self-protection that, while understandable, often turn into emotional walls. They stop receiving love and start competing with it. They lead every conversation, make every decision, and control every outcome, not realizing that this dominance pushes the masculine away instead of inviting it in. Men feel this shift deeply. When a woman operates mostly in her masculine energy, controlling, directing, correcting, a man subconsciously feels that his natural role is being replaced. It's not about ego, it's about instinct. Masculine energy thrives when it's trusted, when it's needed, when it's allowed to lead from a place of purpose and protection. But when that energy is constantly challenged or dismissed, men begin to shut down. They stop offering guidance, they stop initiating, they stop showing up emotionally because they feel there's no space left for their contribution. They start to think, why try if it's never enough or never right? The modern woman's independence is powerful and admirable, but sometimes independence without emotional balance turns into isolation. Many women today unknowingly carry the belief that they don't need a man for anything. They can pay their bills, fix their problems, and raise children alone if necessary. And while that's true on a practical level, emotionally it sends a strong signal. You are not needed here. Men don't want to be worshipped, but they do want to be valued. They want to feel that their presence makes a difference, that their efforts have meaning. When that feeling disappears, attraction begins to fade. Men may admire a woman's strength, but they fall in love with her softness, the part that makes them feel seen, safe, and respected. This misalignment has created a quiet war between the genders, not one of hatred, but of misunderstanding. Women, tired of being hurt, have armored themselves with independence. Men, tired of being rejected, have withdrawn into silence. Each side thinks they're protecting themselves, but in truth, they're protecting themselves from love. The feminine energy that once healed and inspired men is now often replaced by guardedness and criticism. The warmth that once drew him in now feels conditional, given only when he behaves a certain way or meets certain expectations. When a man senses that a woman is leading from a place of control instead of compassion, his instinct isn't to fight her, it's to retreat. He stops trying to lead because he knows it will be questioned. He stops expressing emotion because he knows it will be analyzed. Over time, the relationship turns into a power struggle rather than a partnership. Both sides want love, but neither feels safe enough to surrender to it. This isn't to say that women shouldn't be strong or independent. Strength and softness can coexist. The issue arises when strength replaces softness entirely. Feminine energy doesn't mean dependency. It means emotional openness. It's the ability to listen without judgment, to nurture without controlling, to love without keeping score. That energy is what invites men to lower their guard and connect on a soul-deep level. Without it, relationships become transactional, based on logic, status, or convenience rather than intimacy and trust. Many men today don't feel emotionally connected, not because they fear love, but because they can't feel it anymore. The energy that once felt like home now feels competitive. The nurturing that once soothed them has been replaced by criticism or emotional distance. Men are not asking for submission. They're craving emotional balance, a space where they can lead without being dismissed, love without being tested, and open up without being judged. When the feminine energy becomes misaligned, that space disappears and men quietly walk away, not out of pride, but out of emptiness. When a man goes silent, most people assume he's detached, uninterested, or emotionally unavailable. But in reality, that silence often hides something far more complex. It's not indifference, it's exhaustion. Men's silence is rarely born out of apathy. It's born out of experience. It's a defense mechanism shaped by years of feeling misunderstood, unheard, or dismissed. When a man stops talking, it's not because he doesn't care, it's because he's realized that his words no longer make a difference. His silence becomes his way of protecting himself from another cycle of conflict, rejection, or disappointment. Many men start out as open communicators. They want to share, they want to connect, and they want to express themselves. But over time, after being told that their feelings are invalid, that their pain doesn't compare, or that they're too sensitive, something inside them starts to shut down. They begin to associate communication with confrontation. Every time they try to open up, it turns into an argument or gets used against them later. Eventually, they decide it's safer to say nothing at all, not because they've stopped feeling, but because feeling has become dangerous. Silence for many men becomes the only space where they still have control. When words bring conflict, silence becomes their peace. When vulnerability leads to judgment, silence becomes their shield. And when emotional honesty is met with dismissal, silence becomes their language of survival. They stop explaining, stop defending, stop pleading to be understood, and instead they retreat into quiet detachment. On the outside, it may look like indifference, but inside, it's a man trying to preserve what little emotional energy he has left. Men are taught to endure quietly. From a young age, they learn that emotions make them weak, that talking about pain is unmanly. So even when they suffer, they do it in silence. They could be sitting right next to someone they love, feeling deeply disconnected, but they'll never say it out loud. They'll smile, change the topic, or bury themselves in work. Anything to avoid confrontation, because to them, opening up feels like stepping onto a battlefield they've already lost before. This silence is often misunderstood by women. Many interpret it as emotional distance or lack of effort. They ask, "Why won't he talk to me?" Or "Why won't he open up?" What they don't realize is that he may have opened up before, just not with them. And the last time he did, it didn't end well. Maybe he was ridiculed, dismissed, or made to feel small. That one experience is enough to teach a man that silence equals safety. So he chooses distance over dialogue, even when his heart is still attached. When men feel unheard, they stop trying to explain. They'd rather withdraw than risk being misunderstood again. It's not a lack of communication skills, it's emotional self-protection. Every time they tried to talk and were met with criticism instead of compassion, they learned to lock that door tighter. So now when something hurts, they deal with it internally. They suppress it until it hardens into detachment. And once that happens, getting through to them becomes almost impossible. The tragedy of this silence is that it often goes unnoticed until it's too late. A man may seem calm, composed, even content, but inside he's already halfway gone. He's mentally preparing himself for the peace that comes after letting go. He's stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped fighting to be understood. Because after years of emotional battles, silence feels like freedom. It's not that he stopped loving, it's that he stopped believing love would listen. The world often forgets that men need emotional validation just as much as women do. They need to feel safe expressing doubt, fear, or pain without it being seen as weakness. But instead of safety, they're often met with shame. When they speak softly, they're ignored. When they speak strongly, they're labeled aggressive. There's no safe middle ground. So they learn to adapt, to live in silence, to feel in solitude, to care quietly. That's why so many men seem emotionally distant. It's not because they lack depth, but because their depth has never been welcomed. Their silence isn't a wall built out of arrogance. It's a shield built out of survival. They've learned that sometimes it's better to be silent and misunderstood than to speak and be broken again. So they choose the quiet. Not because they don't want connection, but because silence has become the only place they still feel safe. What we're seeing today isn't a generation of men who hate love. It's a generation of men who no longer feel safe inside it. They aren't walking away because they've stopped caring. They're walking away because they've grown tired of trying to prove their worth in spaces that no longer honor their effort. Modern men are emotionally drained, misunderstood, and quietly rebuilding their peace in solitude. And while it's easy to point fingers, the truth is more complex. Both men and women have become products of a world that's forgotten how to nurture emotional balance. Somewhere between independence and expectation, between equality and competition, love has lost its softness. Men crave the same things women do: safety, understanding, appreciation, and peace. Yet they're often denied the very grace they're expected to give. Their silence, their distance, their withdrawal, these aren't acts of pride. They're responses to years of emotional exhaustion. If relationships are to heal, both sides must return to the basics: empathy, patience, and respect. Women must remember that men too need reassurance and emotional safety. And men must remember that silence, while protective, can also isolate them from the love they still deserve. Healing begins when both genders stop competing and start connecting. When love becomes a partnership again, not a performance. Because at the heart of it all, men aren't asking for perfection. They're not asking for worship. They're simply asking to be seen, not as providers, protectors, or performers, but as human beings who feel deeply, love quietly, and hurt silently. And maybe if we could all listen a little better, love would start to feel safe again.